Africa, a land of immense beauty, diversity and ancient cultures. Yet, its story for centuries is one of suffering and exploitation. European powers, driven by greed and a sense of superiority, descended upon this continent like a plague. They carved it up, stole its resources and enslaved its people. Many of the old trends of the past continue to this day, exposing the true face of the so-called democratic powers. But it all began in the late 19th century, when European countries, intoxicated by their technological superiority and thirst for new resources, turned their eyes to the Black Continent. Europe was ready to colonize Africa as never before. The discovery of quinine allowed Europeans to cope with malaria, which had previously made travel deep into the continent deadly. The invention of rifled weapons gave colonizers a huge military advantage over the local population. And the Industrial Revolution created an urgent need for new markets and sources of raw materials. The first shot in the scramble for Africa sounded in 1876, when Belgian King Leopold II announced the creation of the African International Association. Under the guise of scientific and humanitarian goals, he began the seizure of a vast territory in the Congo basin. Thus was born the infamous Congo Free State, Leopold's personal possession, which became the scene of unprecedented atrocities. The exploitation of the local population on rubber plantations, in mines and on road construction became monstrous. People died by the tens of thousands from hard labor, disease and cruel punishments. Those who failed to meet the rubber harvesting quota faced an agonizing death. The population of the Congo was halved, about 10 million people died. Belgium was followed by other European powers. England, France, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Spain and Italy divided virtually the entire continent in a matter of decades. The race for African territories became hurricane fast. Wherever it was possible to reach an agreement with tribal leaders or break the resistance of local principalities, the European country flag was raised. The colonizers operated on the principle of divide and rule, pitting different tribes and nationalities against each other. The borders of the colonies were drawn arbitrarily, without regard for ethnic and cultural specificities, which laid the foundation for many future conflicts. The economies of the colonies were completely subordinated to the interests of the metropoles. African countries became suppliers of raw materials and cheap labor. Local industry was deliberately suppressed in order not to compete with European goods. The colonizers built some infrastructure, but only to the extent necessary to export resources. The slave trade played a special role in the devastation of Africa. For more than 3 centuries, Europeans exported millions of Africans to work on American plantations. Many more died during capture and transportation. This caused enormous demographic damage to the continent, depriving it of much of its most able-bodied population. Europeans also used other methods of exploitation. For example, they actively drank the local population, making huge profits from the sale of alcohol. In West Africa, rum became an integral part of the golden triangle of the slave trade: rum from the Americas, slaves from Africa, sugarcane from the West Indies. By 1900, the African continent had turned into a patchwork quilt painted in the colors of European empires. Only Ethiopia managed to maintain its independence, even expanding its borders at the expense of neighboring tribes. Africans were taught to obey their white masters, but were not taught autonomy and responsibility. By the end of the colonial period, there were very few educated people and skilled professionals on the continent. Thus, under the pretext of a civilizing mission, European powers ruthlessly exploited Africa's wealth for decades, destroying traditional societies and laying the foundations for the continent's future problems. The consequences of this devastation are still being felt today, manifested in the economic backwardness, political instability and social problems of many African countries. Manifested in the economic backwardness, political instability and social problems of many African countries.